If you're using a Divevolk setup to capture your underwater adventures but are not quite happy with its buoyancy characteristics, today's video is for you. I'll show you 6 of the most common Divevolk setups and how to make each of them neutrally buoyant. Right after the intro. Hey there, you underwater image makers, great to see you back here on the channel for today's video. How to achieve a neutrally buoyant Divevolk rig is a topic that has been requested several times in the past here on the channel, and recently even the guys from Divevolk asked me to finally make this video. So here we go. Making your Divevolk setup neutrally buoyant is an important step in achieving stable underwater footage. The best way of doing this is by determining how heavy your specific rig is underwater and then compensating as closely as possible for that negative lift by adding, for example, float arms to it. Let's start at the beginning. How do we determine how much a specific Divevolk rig weighs underwater? We can either refer to Divevolk's documentation, link to it will be in the video description below, which will give you an estimate on how much each of their product weighs underwater. You can add up the numbers for the product items you're using in your Divevolk rig, and that will give you a general idea on how much weight you'll have to compensate to make your rig neutrally buoyant. The thing is that adding or subtracting any part to or from your rig will influence its buoyancy characteristics. Also, it depends whether you're diving in salt or fresh water and how high the salt concentration is in the body of water you're diving in, as to how much your rig will effectively weigh. So the best and most accurate way of determining your specific needed flotation amount is to use something like a little luggage scale. Have your rig completely assembled the way you would be using it underwater. Attach the luggage scale and submerge your Divevolk setup completely in the body of water you'll be using it in. Check the reading and you'll get a pretty accurate number of buoyancy you'll need to add to your rig to make it neutrally buoyant. Now that we know how much positive buoyancy we need to add, we can look at float arm options. Float arms come in various different sizes and can be combined in numerous ways. Divevolk offers 2 models of float arms themselves, which are working well with the Divevolk ecosystem. The difficulty with float arms is that you will rarely ever find a combination which will match the exact uplift you require. So it's a compromise whether you want to end up with a rig that is slightly too heavy or too light. There are arguments for both options. A slightly positive rig will not sink but float up to the surface if you let go of it for whatever reason. A slightly negative rig on the other side will be easier on your wrists and won't be floating around your head when you have it attached to your BCD and let go of it. Personally, I prefer to have my rig rather slightly negative if I can't manage to make it neutrally buoyant. Alright, enough with the theory. Let's look at the 6 most common Divevolk setups and how to make them neutrally buoyant. And just FYI, I've done all these tests in fresh water here in Lake Zurich, so the results might be slightly different for you depending on where you're using your Divevolk rig. And by the way, you'll find links to all the used float arms in my testing below in the video description. This is the most basic setup, consisting of the C-Touch 4 Max Plus housing only, with my iPhone 16 Pro Max inside. Without any compensation, this is negatively buoyant. I don't find that tragic because it's not very much negatively buoyant, and I do actually like the compactness of this setup. I oftentimes keep this exact setup inside my BCD pocket even when I use my large cinema rig underwater. Whenever I see something I want a quick shot of for social media, I just pull out my Full Max Plus, activate UVA color inside the amazing UWACAM app and capture stunning shots that are ready to be shared right after the dive and without the need for any post-color correction. And I don't need any filters or lights to get these results. That's pretty awesome. If you haven't heard of UWACAM or UVA color before, I suggest you check out this video up here, which will also be linked down in the video description. Trust me, UVA color will literally change the way you use your Divevolk housing. Should you nevertheless want to make this setup neutrally buoyant, you'll have to add other components to it as well, because there are no ways of attaching any float arms to the standalone housing. I suggest adding a clamp and a single arm tray to which you can then attach a float arm. Divevolk's smaller float arm, providing 447 grams of positive lift, works pretty well here. This is a standard setup and very popular among Divevolk users. As with the first setup, I suggest you attach a single arm tray and Divevolk's smaller float arm. The Platinum housing is a bit heavier than the Plus version, so I suggest you use something like the Kraken WeFine adjustable float arm, which has a maximum buoyancy compensation of 520 grams. These specialized float arms allow for buoyancy adjustments while underwater. Through a little valve, you can add water to the inner part of the float arm, reducing its buoyancy characteristics. Unfortunately, this goes only one way underwater and you cannot really make it more buoyant again if you've gone too far. You can empty the water out again after the dive, of course, but not during diving. These are actually my favorite float arms as they are very versatile. This very nice macro setup requires a little more compensation. I found that the larger Divevolk float arm, which provides 872 grams of uplift, will be just short of enough. Now, you can keep it that way, which I recommend, or add a second smaller float arm. So this is the most I would rig up my Divevolk housing for general use. Obviously, with the two lights and the dual handle tray, this gets quite heavy. In my test, I found that two of Divevolk's smaller float arms plus one hard foam float arm that provides about 300 grams of buoyancy will be just right. This is just a float arm that I had laying around in my studio, and these come in a variety of different sizes and buoyancy characteristics. And that's how it works with these buoyancy setups. You determine the needed compensation and then you see what you already have and how you can combine it and what you need to get in addition to make it work for you. This is the exact same setup as the previous one, but using the Platinum instead of the Plus version of the housing. I found that the extra lift the 520 gram Kraken adjustable float arm provides is just right to compensate for the extra weight of the Platinum housing. This setup actually gets it really close. So you see, it's anything but straightforward to get any underwater camera rig neutrally buoyant, and there are many factors to be taken into account. As mentioned at the beginning, it's best to weight your exact setup you're intending on using in the body of water you will be diving in, and then find a combination of float arms that will compensate the weight as closely as possible. Adjustable float arms are good general options as you can change their buoyancy characteristics as needed. There simply isn't one flotation setup that works for every setup, and depending on how exact you want your rig to be neutrally buoyant, you'll need to put more or less effort into achieving that. I hope today's video and the shown examples were useful and maybe even inspirational to you and motivate you to work on the buoyancy of your personal Divevolk rig. Should you have any questions regarding buoyancy of your Divevolk setup, let me know down in the comments section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And Should you want to learn more about how to use your Divevolk system to its full potential, go and check out this video over here next. Have a great week, guys. Keep capturing your awesome underwater adventures, and I will see you in the next video.